The air is thick with the scent of smoke and the distant echoes of war drums as we gather here, beneath the shadow of history's most legendary battles. Can you hear it? The creak of siege engines, the rallying cries of defenders, the desperate clash of steel against shield. These are the moments that defined Middle-earth's darkest hours. Whether you're joining us under the quiet glow of dawn or the hush of midnight, we'd love to know where in the world you're listening from tonight. Drop a comment below and tell us what hour marks your journey into these ancient tales of courage and defiance. Picture, if you will, a world where stone walls tremble under the weight of countless foes, where the fate of entire civilizations hangs by a thread. This is the story of sieges that tested the limits of endurance, where the free people stood against the tides of darkness, outnumbered but never outmatched. From the towering ramparts of Minas Tirith to the hidden strongholds of the dwarves, these battles were more than mere conflicts. They were turning points, moments where history itself held its breath. And tonight, we step into the shoes of those who stood firm, who faced the unimaginable with nothing but grit and determination. What does it take to hold a fortress against the relentless march of an army 10 times your size? How does hope survive when the night seems endless and the enemy's shadow stretches across the land? These are the questions that echo through the annals of Middle-earth's military history, and they are the heart of our journey together. As we recount these epic sieges, you'll witness the brilliance of commanders, the sacrifice of soldiers, and the unbreakable spirit of those who refuse to yield. So settle in, for the fires of war are burning, and the tales we're about to unravel are nothing short of legendary. The siege is about to begin. Are you ready to stand on the front lines of history? The black towers of Barad-dûr rise like jagged teeth against a blood-red sky, an impossible fortress forged in fire and shadow. For 7 long years, the last alliance encircles Mordor's heart, a thin line of light against the creeping darkness. Elven spears gleam beside the battered shields of Numenor, their banners frayed by ash and bitter winds. Gil-galad, the Elven king, whose name means Star of Radiance, stands shoulder to shoulder with Elendil the Tall, their alliance a fragile hope in a land where even the air tastes of despair. Day after day, the siege grinds on, a war not just of swords, but of spirit. Sauron's armies pour forth like a tide of nightmares, orcs shrieking from the pits of Mount Doom, twisted creatures that fear neither pain nor death. Each assault chips away at the free people's strength. Food rots in the poisoned earth. Wounds fester under the eye's gaze. Yet they hold, driven by a oath sworn beneath the very stars that Sauron seeks to extinguish. Then comes the moment that changes everything. The Dark Lord himself strides onto the battlefield, clad in terrible splendor, his mace scattering warriors like autumn leaves. In the clash that follows, Gil-galad falls, his body consumed by flame. Elendil collapses, his sword broken beneath him. But from the ruins, his son Isildur seizes the hilt of Narsil and, with one desperate stroke, he cuts the ring from Sauron's hand. The tower trembles. The armies of Mordor shriek and scatter like mist in sunlight. Yet even in victory, the shadow lingers. Isildur stands amid the wreckage, the ring glinting in his palm. A whisper of choice hangs in the air, to cast it into the fires from whence it came, or to claim it as a prize. We know the path he takes. We know the cost. But in that moment, as the siege ends and the world holds its breath, there is only silence and the weight of a decision that will shape the fate of Middle-earth for millennia to come. The moon hangs low over Minas Ithil, its silver light glinting off the white towers that once shone like a second dawn against the shadow of Mordor. For centuries, this city stood as Gondor's vigilant sentinel, a fortress of wisdom and strength, where the stars themselves seem to linger in reverence. But tonight, the air hums with something darker, a creeping dread that coils around the battlements like invisible fingers. The Nazgul have come. From the blackened plains below, the Witch King's forces advance, a sea of torches flickering like damned souls. The young captain of Minas Ithil paces the ramparts, his armor dented from weeks of skirmishes, his voice hoarse from rallying his dwindling troops. They are Gondor's finest archers with steady hands, swordsmen who have trained since boyhood, scholars who have traded quills for spears. Yet for all their courage, they fight an enemy that does not tire, does not falter, does not bleed as men do. The first wave crashes against the gates, a cacophony of steel and snarling wargs. The defenders hold, their arrows finding their marks, their barricades splintering but not breaking. But then comes the sound that chills even the bravest heart, a shriek that tears through the night, unearthly and suffocating. The Witch King rides forth, his presence alone enough to make torches gutter out, to turn breath to ice in the lungs. Shadows twist at his command, slithering up the walls like living smoke, and where they touch, men collapse, their weapons slipping from nerveless fingers. One by one, the towers fall. The great library, its shelves heavy with centuries of knowledge, burns like kindling. The courtyards, where children once played beneath flowering trees, run red with sacrifice. The captain fights on, his blade flashing in defiance, but even he cannot stop the inevitable. As dawn stains the sky the color of old bruises, the last banner of Minas Ithil is torn down, its white tree trampled into the mud. The chronicler's voice wavers here, their quill pressing hard against the parchment, as if to etch the tragedy into history itself. For in this moment, Minas Ithil does not merely fall, it is unmade. Its beauty curdles into something grotesque, its stones weeping with a sickly green glow. The city that was once a beacon becomes a monument to despair, its very name twisted into mockery, Minas Morgul, the Tower of Sorcery. And as the last echoes of battle fade, the Witch King surveys his prize, knowing this is only the beginning, for where Gondor's light retreats, the shadow grows hungrier. The thunder of 10,000 marching boots shakes the valley of Helm's deep, a rhythmic doom echoing against the fortress walls. King Theoden, his face etched with exhaustion and resolve, grips the hilt of his sword as he surveys the sea of torches flooding the narrow pass. These are no ordinary foes Saruman's Uruk-hai, bred for war, their black armor glinting like beetle shells under the storm-lashed sky. Behind him, women and children huddle in the caves, their whispers swallowed by the distant roar of the enemy's drums. Every soldier on the ramparts knows the math, a handful of men against an ocean of fury, yet not a single shield wavers. Aragorn strides along the battlements, his cloak snapping in the wind, his voice cutting through the tension like a blade. They may take the walls, but they will not take our spirit, he declares, rallying the Rohirrim with a fire that defies the night. Beside him, Legolas notches an arrow, his elven eyes tracing the approaching horde with lethal precision. The air thrums with the creak of bows, the clatter of spears, the collective breath of warriors steeling themselves for the storm. Then silence, a heartbeat of stillness before the first ladder slams against the stone. The battle erupts in a chaos of flashing steel and guttural cries. Arrows darken the sky like vengeful hornets. Uruk high-scale the walls, their snarls drowning out the shouts of defenders. Theoden fights like a man possessed, his sword carving arcs of defiance through the press of bodies. A breach opens in the deeping wall, explosions of fire and shattered rock, and suddenly the enemy pours through like a flood through a broken dam. Theoden's voice rises above the din, raw with command. To the keep, fall back. In the choking dark of the fortress's inner sanctum, hope flickers like a guttering candle. Theoden's shoulders sag under the weight of a king's despair. Aragorn meets his gaze, unyielding. The dawn is coming, he murmurs, though the words taste more like prayer than promise. And then, a horn, clear and bright, cutting through the smoke and ruin. Theoden's head snaps up. On the eastern ridge, a flash of white pierces the gloom. Gandalf the White mounted atop Shadowfax, his staff blazing like a fallen star, and behind him, a tide of riders cascades down the hillside, their spears gleaming like 1,000 silver threads. Theoden's laugh is a thunderclap of joy. Forth, Erlingas, he roars, throwing open the gates. The Uruk High, so confident in their victory, now scramble backward as the king and his rejuvenated host charge into the breaking dawn. It is not the strength of stone that saves Helm's Deep that day. It is the unbroken will of those who refuse to kneel. The moment the first rays of sun kiss the bloodied earth, the tide turns, not by chance, but by the courage of those who held fast when all seemed lost. And as the last Uruk High flee into the shadows, the fortress stands, battered but unbroken, a testament to the power of hope, arriving precisely when it is needed most. The great bell of Minas Tirith tolls a mournful warning as the dawn breaks over the Pelennor fields, not with light, but with the creeping shadow of Mordor's legions. The White City, crown jewel of Gondor, stands encircled, its proud towers now wreathed in smoke, its marble walls splintered by the relentless pounding of siege engines. From the highest tier of the citadel, Denethor, steward of Gondor, stares hollow-eyed at the advancing darkness, his fingers tightening around the palantir, as if its cursed visions might somehow spare him the truth. Below, in the streets, Gandalf the White moves like a tempest, his staff blazing as he shores up crumbling barricades, his voice a whip crack of command that turns fleeing soldiers back to their posts. Pippin, small and trembling but resolute, clutches his short sword as the gates shudder under the battering ram's blows. The guards beside him, men who days ago might have scoffed at a halfling's presence, now share grim nods with him, their faces streaked with soot and sweat. Every crash of Grond, the monstrous wolf-headed ram, sends splinters raining down like daggers. Then, with a groan that seems to come from the earth itself, the gate buckles. Through the smoke strides the Witch King, his armored form radiating malice, his very presence turning the air to poison. The guards falter, their weapons slipping from numb fingers, but Gandalf stands firm, his light flaring against the shadow. Yet even as hope teeters on the edge of ruin, a sound rises in the distance, faint at first, then swelling into a roar, the thunder of hoofbeats, the blare of horns, the battle cries of the Rohirrim. King Theoden leads his riders in a charge so fierce, it splits the gloom like lightning, their golden banners streaming behind them as they crash into the enemy's flank. The Witch King turns, his wrath redirected, and in that moment, the tide of battle shifts not by strategy, but by the raw, defiant courage of those who refuse to let the night win. High above, Denethor finally tears his gaze from the Palantir, his face a mask of shattered pride. The city he thought doomed is fighting back, its people rallying not to his despair, but to the hope kindled by others. As the Rohirrim's swords carve paths through the enemy, as Gandalf's light pushes back the creeping dread, Minas Tirith becomes more than a fortress. It becomes a beacon, proof that even the mightiest shadow can be challenged when courage stands united. The siege is far from over, but in the hearts of those who hold the line, something unbreakable has taken root. The dust of Mordor swirls in choking clouds as Aragorn raises Anduril high, its blade catching the dim light like a promise. Around him stand the last defenders of the free peoples, a ragged assembly of men, elves and dwarves, their armor dented, their faces gaunt from weeks of marching through lands where even the rivers run bitter. This is no grand army, no host gleaming with banners. These are the weary, the wounded, those who have already given everything and now offer what little remains. Yet as Aragorn's voice rings out for Frodo, something ignites in their eyes. This is not a battle they expect to win. It is a distraction, a feint, a final act of defiance to draw Sauron's gaze away from the trembling slopes of Mount Doom. The Black Gate yawns before them, its iron teeth snarling with the promise of annihilation. From its depths pours Sauron's might regiments of orcs with spears like a forest of dead branches, trolls whose footsteps make the ground shudder, winged Nazgul circling overhead with shrieks that freeze the blood. The air reeks of sulfur and rotting meat. Aragorn does not flinch. He strides forward, his boots kicking up ash, his challenge echoing across the desolation. Every second they hold this line is a second more for Frodo, a heartbeat closer to hope. Swords clash in a din that drowns all thought. Gimli's axe bites deep into troll flesh, his laughter fierce even as blood mats his beard. Legola's moves like wind through wheat, each arrow finding its mark with impossible precision. But the enemy is endless, a tide that never ebbs. Men fall, their names lost to the roar of battle. Pippin, pale but steady, drags a wounded soldier to safety, his small hands trembling under the weight, and still the gate holds then, the unthinkable. A tremor runs through the earth, subtle at first, then building into a quake that sends warriors stumbling. The very sky seems to shudder. Barad-dûr, that monstrous spire of shadow, wavers like a mirage. Cracks race up its obsidian flanks, widening into gaping wounds. A sound like the world, splitting apart, rolls across the land, and in an instant, the dark tower collapses inward, its foundations crumbling as if they were never there at all. The battlefield falls eerily silent. Orcs clutch their heads, howling in confusion as the power that bound them unravels. The Nazgul spiral from the sky, their forms dissolving into wisps of smoke. Aragorn sags to his knees, his sword slipping from fingers gone numb with exhaustion. Around him, the survivors exchange dazed glances, their faces streaked with dirt and tears. They came here to die. Instead, they witnessed the impossible, the dawn breaking over Mordor, golden and gentle. as if the land itself remembers what it was before the shadow. The chronicler's quill hesitates here, ink pooling like a tear on the parchment. How to capture the weight of this moment? The cost is written in every hollow cheek, every bandaged wound, every empty space where a friend once stood. Yet as the dust settles, as the first bird song dares to pierce the silence, something else flickers to life, not triumph, not yet, but the fragile, stubborn light of a world given back its chance to heal. The lonely mountain rises like a broken tooth against the sky, its once gleaming halls now choked with smoke and the reek of burning stone. Thorin Oakenshield stands on the battlements, his fingers curled around the hilt of Orcrist, the blade's edge dulled from days of relentless combat. Below him, the land smolders, fields that once fed Dale reduced to cinders, the river running black with ash. This is no ordinary siege. The enemy does not scale walls or batter gates. They come on wings of flame, their bellies full of fire, their very breath a weapon. Smaug's kin have returned, and they bring with them the vengeance of dragons. Inside the mountain, the dwarves move like shadows through corridors that once echoed with song and hammer falls. The great forges, cold now, serve as makeshift shelters for the wounded. Balin's voice is steady as he recounts tactics to the younger warriors, though his hands betray a tremor, not from fear, but from the weight of memory. He remembers the dragon's first coming, the way gold melted like wax under Smaug's gaze. This time, there will be no fleeing. This time, they stand. The first assault had come at dawn, a streak of crimson against the pale sky. The watchman's horns had barely sounded before the flames came, licking at the mountain's flanks like a starving beast. Thorin had ordered the gates sealed, but stone is no match for dragonfire. The defenders fought from the high arches, their crossbows singing, their arrows tipped with the last of the black arrows, forged for this very purpose. Some found their mark, a scaled wing torn, a furious roar that shook loose masonry. But for every dragon that faltered, another took its place. Then, when the air itself seemed too thick to breathe, when the dwarves' beards were stiff with soot, and their voices raw from shouting orders over the din, a sound like a storm breaking. The eagles of the misty mountains swept down from the clouds, their great wings buffeting the smoke aside. Thorin's heart had leapt at the sight, but the hope was short-lived. The eagles harried the dragons, buying precious moments, yet even their might could not turn the tide entirely. One by one, the dwarves were driven back, their lines thinning, their weapons chipped and spent. In the end, it is not victory that defines this battle, but the stubbornness of those who refuse to surrender. Dane Ironfoot arrives with reinforcements from the Iron Hills, his war hammer flashing in the dying light, his voice booming above the chaos. Together, they hold the great chamber of Thror, their backs to the mountain's heart, their defiance etched into every scarred shield and bloodied axe. When the dragons finally withdraw, their hunger unsated, the cost is written in the broken bodies laid out in rows beneath the stars. The lonely mountain still stands, but its halls are quieter now, their gold dulled by soot and sorrow. The chronicler pauses here, their quill hovering over the page. Some scars never fade. Some battles are measured not in ground gained, but in the price paid to hold what little remains. And as the survivors gather to mourn their dead, to rebuild what the fire could not consume, the wind carries an echo, not of dragon's wrath, but of a dwarven lament, low and deep, as the roots of the earth itself. The streets of Dale run red with torchlight and desperation as Bard the bowman stands atop the shattered remnants of the city's eastern gate, his bowstring humming with the tension of 1,000 unanswered prayers. Below him, the Easterling hordes surge forward like a storm-fed river, their curved blades glinting beneath banners stitched with serpents and skulls. These are no mere raiders, they are the Iron Fist of Rune, warriors bred for conquest, their numbers stretching beyond the horizon. Yet Bard's voice never wavers as he rallies the defenders, his words cutting through the din like a knife through smoke. Hold the line, he roars, and the men of Dale answer with a shout that shakes the very stones beneath their feet. Arrows blot out the moon, a hissing tempest of wood and steel. The Easterlings falter, their shields bristling like the spines of some great beast, but the assault does not cease. Wave after wave crashes against Dale's walls, each one gnawing at the barricades like termites at rotten timber. A section of the parapet gives way with a groan, crushed beneath the weight of a battering ram, hauled by oxen, draped in blackened armor. Bard's heart pounds as he watches the breach widen. But then, a sound like silver bells rings out above the chaos. Elven arrows, loosed from the shadows of the surrounding hills, find their marks with unnatural precision. Thranduil's folk have come. The dwarves are not far behind. From the mountain passes Thunder Dane's warriors, their axes gleaming like teeth in the firelight, their war cries echoing off the cliffs. They hit the Easterling flank like a hammer striking an anvil, splitting the enemy's ranks apart. For a moment, the tide turns. Bard leaps down into the fray, his dagger flashing alongside the swords of Dale's last defenders. The air is thick with the scent of sweat and scorched metal, with the screams of the fallen and the defiant songs of those still standing. But sieges are cruel accountants, and the ledger of war always demands payment. Even as the allied forces push the Easterlings back, the cost is etched in the faces of the survivors. The baker who traded his rolling pin for a spear, the elven archer who stumbles with an arrow lodged in her side, the dwarf who clutches a broken shield with fingers crushed beneath a mace. The chronicler's voice catches as they recount the moment. Bard finds his youngest lieutenant slumped against the ruins of a tavern, the boy's breath shallow, his hands still curled around a sword too heavy for him to lift. Dawn breaks over Dale not with triumph, but with exhausted silence. The enemy has retreated, their shadows slinking back across the plains, but the city's wounds run deep. The alliance of men, elves, and dwarves has held, yet the stones whisper of all that was lost to keep them standing. Bard wipes the grime from his face and turns to the survivors, his voice softer now, but no less fierce. We rebuild, he murmurs, and in those two words lies a promise, not just of mortar and timber, but of a spirit no army, no siege, no shadow can ever truly break. The leaves of Lothlórien shiver, not from wind, but from the distant thunder of marching feet. High in her talon, Galadriel does not flinch as the first tendrils of shadow curl through the trees at her borders. The air itself seems to thicken, heavy with the stench of rotting earth and charred metal, the calling cards of Dol Guldur's legions. Below, the elves move like whispers among the silver trunks, their bows strung, their faces serene as still water. There is no panic here, no desperate shouts, only the quiet certainty of those who have spent centuries preparing for this moment. The first wave of orcs crashes through the outer thickets, their crude blades hacking at roots that have stood since the First Age. They expect resistance, but not like this. Golden leaves spiral down like daggers, each one guided by an unseen hand, slicing through armor as if it were parchment. The very trees seem to bend away from the invaders, their branches twisting into barriers, their roots rising like tripwires, and then the singing begins. Not the warlike chants of men or the guttural cries of orcs, but the haunting melodies of the Galadrim, their voices weaving through the forest like an enchantment. With every note, another arrow finds its mark, another shadow falls. Yet Dol Guled, Ur does not relent. From the fortress's black spires, dark magic pulses across the Anduin, a suffocating fog that blots out the stars. The elves' arrows falter mid-flight, their song choked into silence. Galadriel's hands tighten around the silver basin of her mirror, her reflection warping as the enemy's will presses against her own. For the first time in an age, the Lady of Light feels the strain of holding back the night. Her power is vast, but not infinite, and the shadow knows it. Then a flicker, a single elven child, no taller than a sapling, steps forward and places a hand against the bark of a malorn tree. The gesture is small, almost insignificant. But the tree responds, its glow intensifying, pushing back the creeping gloom. One by one, others follow suit. Warriors, artisans, even the aged who have not lifted a weapon in centuries, all pressing their palms to the trunks, their voices rising in a hymn older than the mountains. The forest itself becomes their ally, its roots surging with renewed vigor, its leaves burning like embers in the darkness. The chronicler's quill hesitates here, ink pooling as if reluctant to capture what comes next. For in this moment, Lothlórien does not merely defend itself, it remembers. The golden wood recalls the light of the two trees, the wrath of the valor, the unbroken lineage of those who refuse the call of the sea. Galadriel's eyes blaze with a fire not seen since the days of Feanor, and with a wordless cry, she tears the shadow apart like a veil. The armies of Dol Guled are real, their weapons crumbling to rust, their flesh withering under a light too pure to bear. When dawn finally breaks, the forest stands untouched, its melion stretching skyward as if the night had never been. No songs of victory are sung, no trophies are taken. The elves simply gather their dead, their faces serene, their sorrow as private as the roots beneath their feet. For they know this truth better than any. Some battles leave no scars on the land, only on the soul. And as the last echoes of darkness fade, the leaves return to their gentle shimmer, not in celebration, but in quiet acknowledgement that the war is not yet over. The echoes of ancient battles still cling to the stone halls of Erebor, where the torchlight flickers against runes carved by kings long gone. But tonight, the mountain does not sleep. The very air hums with tension, thick with the scent of oiled steel and the low murmur of dwarven voices chanting battle hymns in the dark. Dane Ironfoot stands at the head of the great hall, his axe, Durin's fury, resting against his shoulder, its edge honed to a razor's gleam. Outside the sealed gates, a sea of torches moves like a creeping wildfire. Orcs and goblins, more than the eye can count, their snarls and drumbeats, shaking loose pebbles from the archways above. This is no raid, this is an annihilation. The first assault comes at the weakest hour, when even dwarven eyes grow heavy. A thunderous boom rocks the gates as a battering ram. A monstrous thing tipped with the skull of some forgotten beast smashes against the ancient hinges. Arrows blacken the arrow slits, their poisoned tips hissing as they clatter against the inner barricades. But Dane does not blink. He raises a gauntleted fist, and from the shadows, 100 crossbows click in unison. Let them taste iron, he growls, and the volley that follows turns the night into a storm of death. Yet the enemy does not retreat. They come in waves, climbing over their own fallen, their crude ladders splintering but never breaking fast enough. The dwarves fight as their ancestors did, shoulder to shoulder, their shields interlocking like the scales of a dragon. Balin, his beard now streaked with silver, directs the younger warriors with a calm that belies the fire in his eyes. Hold the choke points, he barks, his voice cutting through the din. A dwarf in a doorway is worth 100 in the open. And then, disaster. A section of the eastern wall, weakened by some long-forgotten crack, collapses under the weight of a troll's makeshift ram. The breach yawns wide, and through it pours a tide of snarling fiends. For a heart-stopping moment, the line wavers, but Dane is already moving, his axe carving a crimson path through the invaders. His roar is not one of rage, but of something deeper, a promise. Erebor is ours by blood and stone, he bellows, and no filth of Mordor will take it from us. The countercharge is brutal. Dwarves who moments ago seemed exhausted now fight with the strength of those who have nothing left to lose. From the upper galleries, the archers of Dale, late but not too late, rain arrows into the enemy's flanks. The tide turns not with a grand stratagem, but with the sheer stubbornness of those who refuse to let their home fall again. When dawn finally stains the sky, the battlefield is silent save for the groans of the dying and the steady clink of dwarven armor as the survivors survey the wreckage. The gates are scarred but standing. The halls, though bloodied, remain unconquered. Dane kneels beside a fallen comrade, his hand closing the dwarf's unseeing eyes. Mark this day, he murmurs to those gathered, their faces drawn with exhaustion and grief. Tell your children's children how Durin's folk held the mountain, not for gold, not for glory, but for the right to call it home. The chronicler's quill pauses here, the ink pooling like a shadow at the edge of the parchment. Some victories are not measured in ground gained, but in the price paid to keep what was already yours. And as the first rays of sunlight creep through the cracked battlements, the echoes of hammers begin anew, not forging weapons this time, but rebuilding what was broken. The mountain remembers, and it endures. The great arches of Osgiliath sag under their own weight, their once proud stones slick with blood and river mist. By day, the city had been Gondor's beating heart, a jewel strung across the Anduin, its bridges teeming with merchants and scholars, its towers alive with the laughter of children. By night, it becomes a graveyard. Boromir braces against the parapet of the western bridge, his sword arm trembling not from fear, but exhaustion. Hours have bled into days, and still the enemy comes, their ranks swelling with every tide of black-clad orcs that row across the river on barges lashed together from the bones of dead trees. At his side, Faramir knocks another arrow, his fingers raw from the bowstring. The brothers exchange no words. None are needed. Years of shared battles have honed their movements into a silent dance. Boromir's blade flashes where Faramir's arrows cannot reach. Faramir's aim finds the throats of those who slip past Boromir's guard. Together, they are a storm, but even storms tire. The first bridge falls at midnight, A thunderous crack splits the air as the eastern span's central pillar gives way, swallowed by the Anduin's greedy current. The defenders stationed there vanish beneath the waves, their cries cut short. Boromir's jaw tightens. Retreat is not in his nature, but the order comes nonetheless, shouted hoarsely by a captain whose face is half shrouded in bandages. Fall back to the second tier, hold the crossings at all costs. What follows is not a battle, but a slow unraveling. Street by street, the brothers fight a retreat that feels less like strategy and more like ritual. A grim acknowledgement that Osgiliath cannot be saved, only bought. The enemy's torchlight reflects in the puddles at their feet, turning the cobblestones into a fractured mirror of fire and shadow. Faramir's arrows dwindle. Boromir's shield splinters under the blow of a troll's club, and still they stand. The chronicler's voice falters here, their quill tracing the shape of loss more than word. For in these final hours, Osgiliath's true tragedy is not its stones, but its people. A mother shields her child beneath the wreckage of a toppled statue, her whispered lullaby drowned by the clash of steel. An old scholar, his robes tattered, hurls a lantern into an advancing pack of orcs, buying 3 fleeing soldiers an extra breath of life. These are the moments that linger when the banners have fallen, not the grand strategies, but the quiet, desperate acts of ordinary courage. When the last bridge collapses, it takes with it the city's soul. Boromir drags Faramir from the rubble, his brother's leg bleeding from a spear wound. The river swallows the ruins behind them, its waters churning with broken shields and shattered dreams. As they stagger toward the retreating Gondorian lines, the brothers do not look back. Some memories are too heavy to carry, and so Osgiliath passes into legend, not with a roar, but with a whisper, its name etched into the annals of Middle-earth as a warning, a testament, and a wound that never truly heals. The waves crash against the white quays of the havens, with a rhythm older than the sun, each surge carrying the salt-kissed whispers of a world slipping away. Círdan the shipwright stands atop the highest tower, his weathered hands gripping the rail as he watches the eastern sky darken, not with storm clouds, but with the winged shadows of Mordor's vanguard. Behind him, the last ships bob at their moorings, their silver sails furled like sleeping birds. These are no vessels of war, but arcs of memory, each hull carved from Malorn wood that still hums with the light of Valinor. The call to arms rises softly at first, a single elven horn ringing clear above the murmur of the sea. Then, like a tide turning, the havens stir to life. Warriors clad in armor that glints like fish scales take their positions along the breakwater, their arrows tipped with starlight. Smiths who once crafted jewels now fashion barricades from driftwood and shattered masts. Children too young to lift a sword are ushered aboard the waiting ships, their wide eyes reflecting not fear, but a quiet understanding. This is not their battle to fight. Círdan descends the tower steps with the slow certainty of one who has already glimpsed the end. His voice, when he speaks, carries the weight of millennia. We do not hold these shores for victory, he tells the gathered elves, his gaze lingering on each face as if committing them to memory. We hold them for time enough to let go. The first black arrows fall like poisoned rain, hissing as they strike the waves. Nazgûl circle overhead, their shrieks peeling away the courage of lesser hearts, but the elves of the havens do not waver. Their songs rise above the din, melodies woven from the very fabric of the sea songs of Tyrion's golden streets, of Alqualande's swan ships, of laughter that once echoed through the branches of the two trees. Each note is a defiance, a refusal to let the shadow claim even their voices. And then, the moment the chronicler's quill trembles to record the order to depart. One by one, the ships slip their moorings, their decks crowded with the last keepers of elven lore, their holds heavy with artifacts that will never again see the light of Middle-earth. Círdan remains on the docks, his long hair whipping in the wind as he watches them go. He does not wave, he does not weep, he simply stands, a sentinel against the coming dark, until the final vessel vanishes beyond the curve of the world. The battle that follows is swift and merciless. The havens burn, their pearly towers crumbling into the hungry sea. Yet as the smoke blots out the stars, a single ship's lantern flickers on the horizon, a pinprick of light that refuses to be swallowed. The chronicler pauses here, their ink staining the parchment like a tear, for in that fragile glow lingers all the sorrow and splendor of the elder days, carried westward not in triumph, but in quiet, unbroken hope. The green hills of the Shire glow under an autumn sun that should feel warm, but there's a chill in the air, a wrongness that prickles the skin like spider silk. The Brandywine River, usually bustling with fishing poles and children's laughter, runs silent. Windows that once gleamed with firelight are shuttered tight. And in the heart of Bywater, a band of ruffians in mismatched armor swaggers through the market square, their boots kicking up dust where carts of ripe produce should be. These are no ordinary bandits. They answer to a master with a voice like poisoned honey Saruman, though the hobbits who whisper his name don't yet know the depth of his spite. Frodo Baggins stands at the edge of the Green Dragon, his hands curled into fists at his sides. The journey home should have been a respite, a return to soft beds and second breakfasts. Instead, he finds his people cowed, their fields trampled, their beloved party tree reduced to a stump. Sam's face is a storm beside him, Merry and Pippin already trading glances that promise mischief of the most dangerous kind. It's one thing to face the terrors of Mordor, another to see fear in the eyes of those you love. What follows isn't a grand battle with flashing swords and thunderous charges. It's something far more hobbitish, and in its own way, just as mighty. Farmers trade their pitchforks for spears. Millers' sons slip through back alleys with slingshots full of pebbles. The Tyne himself, old and gouty, but with fire in his eyes, rallies the sheriffs with a speech that includes at least 3 references to proper tea etiquette. And at the center of it all, Frodo does what no one expects. He leads not with anger, but with quiet, unshakable certainty. This is our home, he tells them, his voice barely louder than the rustle of the barley fields. And we will tend it. The scouring of the Shire is won not by strength of arms, but by sheer stubbornness. A well-aimed turnip knocks a ruffian senseless. A chorus of hobbit war cries, which sounds suspiciously like a harvest song with improvised lyrics, sends a pack of wolves fleeing in confusion. And when the final confrontation comes at Bag End, it's not with the clash of steel, but with the creak of a door swinging open to reveal Saruman, his grandeur reduced to a tattered robe, his voice still dripping with venom, even as his power crumbles like old chalk. Frodo doesn't raise a sword, he offers mercy, and in that moment, the Shire doesn't just reclaim its land, it reclaims its soul. The chronicler's quill hesitates here, ink pooling like honey on the page. For all the grand sieges of Middle-earth, perhaps none are as quietly revolutionary as this one. No towers fall, no songs are sung of glory, but as the first apples bloom again in the orchards, as the smell of baking bread returns to Hobbiton's lanes, something shifts, not just in the Shire, but in the very fabric of the tale. Even the smallest light, it seems, can banish the deepest shadows, and sometimes the bravest battles are fought not for kingdoms, but for the right to kneel in your own garden and feel the earth between your fingers, unafraid. The fires of Angband burn eternal, a smoldering wound in the flesh of the world, its smoke staining the northern sky for centuries. Here, beneath the crushing weight of Thangorodrim's peaks, the mightiest alliance elves and men ever forged presses against the gates of darkness itself. Fingolfin's host stands arrayed across the plains of Anfaglith, their banners, silver, blue, and gold, fluttering like defiant stars against the perpetual twilight. Their siege is not one of months or years, but of ages, a grinding stalemate where every inch of ground is paid for in blood and whispered hope. At first, the Noldor's confidence shines brighter than their armor. Their swords are sharp, their spirits unbroken, their resolve hardened by the oath that drives them to reclaim the Silmarils stolen by Morgoth, those jewels hallowed by the light of the two trees. Fingon's cavalry scours the edges of Angband's dominion, cutting down orc patrols with the precision of a scythe through wheat. Turgon's hidden city of Gondolin, a secret even from allies, stands as a promise, a last sanctuary should the war turn dire. And for a time, it seems Morgoth's power can be contained, but darkness thrives on patience. The first cracks appear not in the siege lines, but in the hearts of those who hold them. Fingolfin, High King of the Noldor, rides alone to Angband's gates, his fury a tempest that even Morgoth cannot ignore. The duel that follows shakes the mountains, each stroke of Fingolfin's sword ringing like a bell of doom. Each wound he deals a scar the Dark Lord will bear forever. Yet pride is a blade that cuts both ways. Fingolfin falls, his body broken but his spirit untamed, and with him falls something far more precious, the unshakable belief that Morgoth can be defeated by valor alone. Then comes Mieglin, dark-haired and darker-hearted, his betrayal seeping like poison into Gondolin's gleaming streets. Lured by promises of power and a twisted love, he whispers the city's secrets to Morgoth's agents, unraveling centuries of vigilance in a single act of treachery. When the dragons pour forth from Angband's pits, the great winged worms of fire and scale, they do not come blindly. They fly straight for Gondolin's hidden valleys, their bellies full of ruin. The chronicler's quill trembles here, the ink pooling like spilled blood, for the siege of Angband is not a story of sudden collapse, but of slow, suffocating despair. The elves fight on, their numbers dwindling, their once gleaming armor dulled by soot and sorrow. The Edain, mortal men who stood beside them, now bury their dead in mounds that dot the landscape like scars. Hope flickers only in the most fragile of places, in Lúthien's song, in Berin's desperate quest, in the unbroken line of Gil-galad, a child prince who will one day carry this legacy into a new age. And so the siege endures, not as a noose around Morgoth's throat, but as a chain around the throats of those who oppose him. The land itself withers, the rivers running thick with ash, the very air tasting of charred metal. Yet in the end, it is not force of arms that breaks the deadlock, but a theft as daring as Morgoth's own. For when Beren and Luthien steal a single Silmaril from the Iron Crown, they prove what centuries of warfare could not, that even the mightiest darkness can be pierced by light, if only for a moment. And in that moment, the seeds of Morgoth's undoing are sown. The dust of Mordor rises in slow, choking spirals as the last alliance marches, a river of steel and determination flowing across the ashen plains. Gil-galad's elves move with the quiet grace of starlight, their armor gleaming faintly under the bruised sky, while the men of Numenor tread with the steady resolve of those who know their names will be etched into history or erased by it. Together, they are a tapestry of defiance, threads of silver and gold woven against the encroaching shadow. The air hums with an unspoken truth. This is not merely an army, but a covenant. Elves who once turned away from the light of Valinor now fight beside men whose island home sank beneath the waves. Their alliance is fragile, a breath held too long, yet in this moment it holds. Scouts return with reports that make even the boldest warriors tighten their grips on their weapons. The land ahead is a graveyard of jagged rock and whispering winds, where the very earth seems to recoil from their footsteps. Water skins run dry too quickly. Horses, bred for war, stumble on unseen cracks in the ground, their nostrils flaring at scents no living creature should recognize. And always, the eye watches not from the distant tower, but from the weight of the silence, from the way the wind carries half-heard voices that might be echoes or something far worse. Yet amid the dread, there are sparks of something purer. Elendil the Tall walks beside Gil-galad, their strides matched despite the difference in their years. Where the Elven King's presence is like the cool certainty of dawn, Elendil burns with the fierce warmth of a hearth in winter. At night, when the campfires flicker low, their commanders gather not to strategize, but to remember. An elf sings of Tyrion's lost towers. A man answers with a ballad of Numenor's white shores. For a few fleeting hours, the past is not a wound, but a beacon. The chronicler's quill lingers here, tracing not just the march, but the quiet miracles within it. A young Númenórean healer learns to bind wounds with elvish techniques, her hands quickening under an elder's guidance. A Sylvan archer shares his last drops of Maruver with a coughing soldier, though they've never spoken before. These are the moments the histories often omit, the fragile, human, and not so human stitches holding the fabric of an alliance together. As the host nears Barad-dûr, the camaraderie doesn't vanish, but it changes. Shoulders stiffen, jokes die unsaid. The weight of what's to come settles like a second layer of armor. Gil-galad lifts his spear, and the light catches the inscription along its blade, a line of Quenya that reads, "For the love of all that still grows." Elendil's sword, Narsil, whispers against its scabbard, as if eager to fulfill its purpose. The air itself seems to thicken, charged with the tension of a bowstring drawn too tight. They all feel it, the turning point, the last step before the plunge. The ground trembles, not from the tramp of boots, but from something deeper, as if the earth knows what they do, that after this, nothing will be the same. And so they walk on, the dust of their footsteps, a temporary mark on a land that has swallowed kingdoms. The chronicler does not call them heroes yet. That word belongs to the survivors, here now, They are simply those who chose to march. The forest of Mirkwood holds its breath as the White Council gathers at its shadowed edge, their robes stirring in a wind that carries the scent of decay. This is no ordinary stronghold they approach. Dol Guldur, black spires twist skyward like claws, their foundations pulsing with a malevolence that makes the very air hum. Galadriel's hand tightens around her staff, the silver light at its tip flickering as if struggling against an unseen tide. Beside her, Elrond's gaze is distant, his mind tracing the invisible threads of power woven through the fortress's stones. The necromancer's presence is everywhere here, in the gnarled roots that coil too tightly around passing ankles, in the whispers that slither between the trees, in the way the moonlight seems to curdle as it touches the battlements. They do not march with armies. This battle will not be won by swords alone. Saruman, ever the strategist, paces the perimeter with a scholar's precision, murmuring incantations that ripple the earth like dropped stones in a pond. Radagast, usually so at home among the trees, stands unnaturally still, his fingers buried in the feathers of a thrush that trembles against his palm. The council's strength lies not in force, but in the delicate balance of their combined wills, a harmony of light against the discord of Sauron's lingering shadow. The first assault is silent. Galadriel's voice lifts in a song older than the mountains, each syllable a blade of pure starlight slicing through the fortress's defenses. Elrond's hands move in intricate patterns, unraveling the dark spells knotted into Dol Guldur's foundations like rotten sutures. For a moment, the tower wavers, its stones groaning as if waking from a nightmare. Then, a retaliation. The necromancer's laughter echoes through the woods, a sound like cracking ice, and the ground heaves beneath them. Vines lash upward, thorns glistening with venom. Shadows coil into shapes with too many eyes, their whispers promising truths no mortal mind should bear. Saruman's staff strikes the earth with a crack that splits the air. Enough, he roars, and for the first time, the council sees the depth of his power. Not just wisdom, but wrath. The vines blacken and wither. The shadows shriek as his light scours them away. Yet even as the fortress trembles, the chronicler's quill hesitates. Victory is not certain. The necromancer's essence slithers through their grasp like smoke, his taunts lingering long after his physical form retreats. You may cast me out, his voice slithers through the trees, but shadows always return to where the light falters. When the dust settles, Dol Guldur stands empty, its halls echoing with the absence of the dark presence that once festered within. The White Council does not celebrate. They exchange weary glances, their silence heavier than any words, for they know the truth. This was no ending, but a reprieve. The necromancer is gone, but Sauron's will endures, biding its time in the cracks of the world. And as Galadriel turns her face toward Lothlórien, the wind carries the faintest echo of a promise, one that will shape the wars to come. You have won the tower. But the war has only just begun. Deep beneath the misty mountains, the forges of Khazad-dûm roar with a heat that could melt stone, their glow painting the cavernous ceilings in hues of molten gold. For centuries, the dwarves have carved their legacy into these halls, pillars broad as ancient oaks, staircases spiraling like the roots of the earth itself, treasures gleaming in vaults, so vast their echoes never return. The air thrums with the rhythm of 1,000 hammers, the song of a people at the height of their craft. Yet in their pride, they dig deeper, driven not by need, but by the whisper of something richer, something purer. The veins of mithril shine brighter here, their silver light almost alive in the rock, and with each new discovery, the dwarves forget the old warnings etched into the very stone they mine. Then the silence. It starts as a hush in the deepest tunnels, where the torches gutter out for no reason, where the picks strike something too soft to be stone. The miners' laughter dies in their throats. The air thickens, hot and sulfurous, clinging to the skin like oil. When the first screams rise, they don't sound human. They don't sound like anything that belongs in this world. The Balrog comes not as a beast, but as a force of nature, a storm given flesh, its wings of shadow swallowing the light, its whip of fire carving molten scars into the marble floors. The dwarves rally, their axes raised, their battle cries shaking the caverns. But courage is no match for a creature older than the mountains themselves. Durin's bane moves with the inevitability of a landslide, its very presence unraveling the strength of those who stand before it. Warriors who face dragons without flinching now stagger back, their armor blistering, their beards singed to ash. The great gates meant to hold back armies splinter like kindling. The runes of warding, carved by the first fathers of the dwarves, glow once, then shatter. The chronicler's voice wavers here, their quill pressing into the parchment, as if to carve the tragedy into history itself. For the fall of Khazad-dûm is not a battle lost, but a light extinguished. The libraries where generations of lore were etched in crystal, the forges that birthed weapons worthy of songs, the echoing chambers where kings once held court, all become a tomb in moments. The last survivors flee, their faces streaked with soot and tears, their hands empty of all but the echoes of hammers that will never sound again. And in the silence that follows, the lesson lingers like smoke in the air. No kingdom, no matter how mighty, is stronger than the darkness it wakes in its hunger. The Balrog does not chase the fleeing dwarves. It does not need to. Its victory is complete. The halls of Khazad-dûm stand empty, their grandeur now a monument to pride's price, their very name whispered in dread by those who pass the mountain's shadow. The dwarves will return, centuries later, to reclaim what was lost, but some doors, once opened, can never truly be closed again. The chronicler's voice softens as they close the tome of war, the fires of memory dimming to embers. These sieges, though desperate, were more than battles. They were the forge in which the courage of Middle-earth's peoples was tempered, blow by crushing blow. Each fallen wall, each broken gate, each moment when darkness seemed absolute became a crucible, revealing not just strength of arms, but strength of spirit. The echoes of these struggles linger in the very stones of the land, in the songs sung over hearths, in the way a child's fingers might trace the scar on an old warrior's shield and ask, "Tell me how this came to be." What endures is not merely the memory of blood and fire, but the quieter truths woven through them. The hobbit who stood firm in the Shire's defense, though his hands shook. The dwarf who held a crumbling doorway long enough for others to flee. The elf who sang as the shadows closed in, her voice a final defiance. These are the threads that bind the great tapestry of Middle-earth's history, not the grand strokes of kings and wizards alone, but the countless small acts of ordinary beings who chose to stand when standing seemed folly. And so the tome closes, but the story does not end. For every siege, every desperate hour, carries within it a paradox. The deeper the shadow, the brighter even the smallest light becomes. The ruins of Osgiliath still whisper to the Anduin's currents. The scars on Helm's deep still catch the sunset. The shards of Narsil still gleam in the hands of those who remember its purpose. These are not just relics of war, they are promises. That courage is not the absence of fear, but the will to act despite it. That home is worth defending, even when the cost is beyond counting. That hope, fragile as a candle in the wind, can outlast even the longest night. The chronicler's hand hesitates, then lifts from the page. Some tales are too vast for endings. They ripple outward, touching lives unseen, shaping futures unimagined. So let the embers glow a little longer. Let the stories breathe, for in the telling and the listening, the battles are fought anew, and the fallen stand once more beneath banners of memory, their voices murmuring the same truth across the ages. Hold fast. The dawn will come.